in Masechet Sanhedrin, which is Lamed Gimel 33, which is the daf for Sunday, January 19th. So says the Gemara. So we had our Mishnah yesterday, which talked about the differences in how you actually analyze, present the case, how the judges decide things in Dinei Mamonit and, Dinei Nefashot. And then we start talking about many differences. So one of the differences we got up to was that Dinei Mamonit, the Mishnah said, are machzirin, that you can go back, you can undo the din, meaning you change the opinion, whether it's chut or chova, but Dinei Nefashot, you can only change if it's for innocence, but not for guilt. Now, the Gemara today, and a lot of today, discusses how you can change a din. What does that mean that you're machzirin, bein the schut, bein the chova, right? The guy says, someone came in and said, Ruvain did damage to my farm, I don't know, whatever, in the amount of $10,000. So then you either say he owes it or he doesn't owe it, right? Ruvain owes money, doesn't owe money. What does it mean that you're machzirin? What about the following Breita, which we have quoted? It's a Mishnah, actually. We quoted this Mishnah earlier in the Masechta, and we've had it many times. The Mishnah says the following in Masechet Bechorot. Let's say you are done at Adin. The judge comes out with the conclusion of the din, and you're zikat chayav. You make the guilty one innocent. So you make a mistake, or you're chayav et zakai. You say the guy's really innocent, but you make him chayav. You say he's guilty, or timei tahar, or if you make tameh that which is really tahar, or the opposite, tihara tameh. You say it's tahar when in fact it's really tameh. So you make a mistake. Says the Mishnah, Masha asa asoy. What you've done is done. Vishalimi beito. You got to pay up. So meaning that the judgment does not undo, but the judge who made that mistake has to make it good, has to make it whole. So I don't understand. Our Mishnah said that if you make a mistake, you undo the din. So what do you mean? This Mishnah clearly contradicts our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says you can be machzirin, you can undo the din, bein the schut, bein the chova. The Mishnah Bechorot says a judgment's a judgment, and you got to pay up. So how do you reconcile those? Amar Rav Yosef Lokasha. It's not a contradiction. It's not a problem. Kam b'mumcha, kam b'she'eno mumcha. It depends on whether the judge is a mumcha. If the judge is a mumcha, then he doesn't have to pay. And we're going to, seems like our Mishnah, you can be machzir. If it turns out that the judge is a mumcha made a mistake, we say that's a professional mistake, you undo the din. If you're eno mumcha, if you're not a mumcha, you're not an expert, then, and you made a judgment and you turned out to make a mistake, we say, look, at the end of the day, they accepted you as their judge, so the din stands, but you got to pay up because you made a mistake. So, says where is that true? Is it true that if a person's an expert and they make a judgment, that not only do they not have to pay for the mistake, but that you undo the judgment? So if they said, Ruvain owes Shimon $10,000 in damages, and then they analyzed it deeper and said he made a mistake, we take away that judgment and Ruvain doesn't have to pay it? Hakatani, we learned earlier, our Mishnah basically is not a mumcha, right? And that's where you're machzirin. Is that what I said? I don't remember if I said it the right way. But our Mishnah, which says you're machzirin, is a mumcha, right? The Mishnah which says you're not machzirin is ain't a mumcha, which I think is what I said. It says, but is that true? That with the mumcha you go after our Mishnah and you're machzirin the judgment? Hakatani, but the Mishnah continues in Bechorot and says, Im haya mumcha lebeitin patrom l'shalim. If you're a mumcha to the beitin, then you don't have to pay. Meaning the Mishnah in Bechorot says, if you make a mistake, the din stands, but you got to pay. And if you're an expert, you don't have to pay. So very clearly, the Mishnah there is talking about an expert. So how do you say that Mishnah is only talking about an Eino Mumcha? Amr Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, it's really complicated. It's more complex, not complicated. Kan sheyesh gadol himenu b'chachma b'minyan, kan she'en gadol himenu b'chachma b'minyan. It depends on whether you have another court that is greater than the first court. If you don't have another court that's greater than the first court, then basically you don't change the din. You say, this is the judgment. We made a judgment. Turns out that there was a mistake. If you're not an expert, you got to pay. If you're an expert judge, you get patur from paying, but the din stands. But if there's a new court that is greater than the previous court in chachma, which means they're wiser, whoever determines that, knowledgeable, and minyan, and they're greater in number, then you can change the din, right? So kan our Mishnah is talking about where there's a greater court. So then you can actually revisit, like an appeals court, you can revisit the judgment and change it. And the Mishnah Bechorot, you don't have a greater court, basically. It's just what it is. It turns out that there was a mistake, right? But the gin stands, and you either have to pay if you're not a mumcha or don't pay if you are a mumcha. So that's the first answer. That's Rav Nachman's answer. Rav Sheshet says it's much more complex than that, and it depends on the nature of the mistake. Meaning, if you have a court that makes a judgment and it turns out that they made a mistake, but it's a subtle mistake, then we don't undo the judgment. We say the judgment stands, but if you're not an expert, you got to pay. If you are an expert, you don't have to pay. But our mission is referring to where you made a gross mistake, right? Where they made a halacha, they totally somehow they all forgot one pasuk or one mishnah, and they did the entire thing wrong. Then basically that din turns out to be an error, and you undo it. So if Shesha says kan shita'ah b'dvar mishnah, our mishnah is talking about where you made a mistake. In a dvar mishnah means something in a mishnah, something that's clearly written in a halacha straight out. You should have never made that mistake. Kan, the Mishnah, bechor shita'ah b'shikul hadat. You made a mistake in something that is, given to debate. And there, it's not as clear. You don't undo the din. You just have to pay. Damar Rav Sheshet, Amar Rav Asi, as Rav Sheshet is quoted in the name of Rav Asi is saying, Ta'ab b'dvar Mishnah, if the judges make a mistake in something that's explicitly written in a Mishnah, then choser, then you undo the judgment once you discover that. But Ta'ab b'shikul hadat, eno choser. But if you make a mistake in something that is shikul hadat, that's given to discussion, then you don't undo it. Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, well, you say a Mishnah, right? Usually a Mishnah is what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote. But what about the Braitot? What about the Braitot of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshaya, right? Or not Rabbi Oshaya wrote Braitot, right? Rabbi Chia did too, but we're saying, what about the Braitot, right? Afilu ta'ab Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Oshaya, even if you made a mistake in something that's explicitly written by Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Oshaya, yeah, that's explicitly written. What about the later, the earlier Amoraim, but not Tanaim? Afilu Rav and Shmuel, right? They said statements. What if you forgot something Rav or Shmuel said and then discovered it? Yeah, absolutely. That's something that everyone should know. What about, said Ravina to Rav Ashi? Remember, Ravina and Rav Ashi now are the end of the Gemara. What about you and me? Afilu Didi v'Didach. What about you and me? Amalei said, what do you mean? Atu anan katli kani ba'agmana? What are we? Literally, it was obviously a phrase they used to make. But are we cutting down reeds in the swamp? Meaning, are we low class people have an unintelligent job that you don't need any brains for? We also, yes, we are the rabbis. We're in charge. And once we say something, if someone later forgets what we said, then they made a big mistake, and the din is undone. Says Marbo, so what's an example of shikul hadat? Hechidami shikul hadat. Amar Papa, it's the kind of thing where it can go on trei tanai, trei amorai pliyada. You have two tanaim who are equal, so or relatively equal, or two amoraim, and they argue with each other. And lo itmer helchata lo kamar lo kamar. There isn't really a conclusion that the halacha is like this one or like that one. The ikri vavikichad minayo, but. So obviously at this point, if there's just an argument, you choose one. That's not a mistake. That you pass like one side. But it turns out that Ikri, the Ave Kichaminau, this guy got up and paskin like one of them, right? Like A. But Sugya Deshmaita Azdikidach. But it turns out that the main Sugya Deshmaita means the discussion in the Gemara or the discussion among the Tanaim and the Amoraim went like the other one. So the mainstream opinion was the other one, but it was not clearly paskin. We're paskin like that one. So Hainu Shikul Hadat, that is where you say you made a mistake in Shikul Hadat. Now you can think about it more and come back and say, after I analyzed it in more detail, it was a mistake. Eight Veira from Nuna of Sheshet. So from Nuna asked of Sheshet a question from a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we had earlier, a Mishnah that we were quoting earlier about you make a mistake, you're choser. So the Mishnah continues and says, Ma'aseh beparashal beit menachem shnitula ha'im shala. There was a story with a cow. This just gives you a great example of what judgments were deliberated. Someone showed up with a cow who didn't have an aim. The aim of a cow's the aim of any aim is the word for uterus, right? So basically, cow got an infection. They did surgery on it, and they took out the uterus. So the cow was brought to court. Obviously, I don't think they had to bring the cow, but they brought the case to court, and they asked Rabbi Tarfon, "Is this cow kosher or not?" Right? Or is that considered to be a treifa? Remember, treifa is if you have a wound that the animal's going to die from. This animal doesn't have a uterus. Is that considered to be a fatal thing? And Rabbi Tarfon said, yes, it's a treifa. So the case was there was a para, a beit menachem that didn't have an aim, didn't have a uterus. V'echila Rabbi Tarfon l'klavim. They brought it to Rabbi Tarfon. He said, you can't eat it. You have to feed it to the dogs, right? I guess to be honest with you, they discovered this after they shechted the animal, maybe, so it was already dead. But either way, you can't eat it. It's not kosher. And he fed it to the dogs. So that was his psak. Turns out he was wrong. Says the Mishnah, they heard the Chachamim in Yavna heard about this story of this wombless cow. And they said, no, that's wrong. It's not a treifa. It's mutar. You can eat the meat. Sha'amar Tudas Harofe, because we have medical advice. Tudas, the doctor, is very famous. We quote him in the Gemara a lot, who said, quote, Ein para v'chazira yotzeit me'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim elam kein chotchin ha'im shala. They never exported a cow or a pig from Alexandria, where they had a huge market, I guess, in animals. If you didn't pay the price, unless they took out the uterus, because they didn't want you to breed with their cows, so they can sell you more, right? It's like this, like the seeds. But you see Kadesh Lo Teleit, so that it wouldn't give birth. So you see clearly that these people were able to remove the uterus of a cow, and it didn't become a treifa, because obviously no one's going to buy cows that are not going to live, right? So clearly, they would only sell animals that had this done to them. So it turns out that Rabbi Tarfon was wrong. He didn't know the medicine. He didn't know the halacha. So Amar Rabbi Tarfon heard about this and he said, oh boy, halcha chamarcha Tarfon. There goes your cow, your chamar. There goes your donkey, Tarfon. Meaning, oh boy, they're going to come sue me because I trafed up their cow. So instead of selling it for $1,000, they sold it for $10 to feed to the dogs. I'm going to lose I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. Chamar, I'm going to lose my donkey. Says Rabbi Akiva, I'm Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Tarfon, Paturata, don't worry, you don't have to pay. Shekol amumche lerabim patur min l'shalim. Anyone who's mumche lerabim is patur from paying. So basically, Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake. He thought, oh, if I made a mistake, the Mishnah says in Bechorot that the din is undone and you got to pay. Rabbi Akiva said to him, that's true for a regular person, but for an expert, you don't have to pay. But says the Gemara, but go back to our Mishnah. Remember, we said that the only case where the din stands, as the Mishnah Bechorot said, is if you're ta'ab shikul hadat. You make a mistake in a logical thing, or shikul hadat literally means an opinion. But if you make a mistake in a Mishnah, then our Mishnah in Sanhedrin is correct that the din is undone. So im ita, if it's true, why didn't Rabbi Akiva say to Rabbi Tarfon, right? Ta'ab b'dvar mishnata. You made a mistake in a Mishnah. Now, if you make a mistake in a Mishnah, then you say the din is not true anymore, right? But Ta'ab b'dvar mishnah choser. So you basically should say my psak that was a treifa is a mistake, and so forget about it. It's not a treifa. You can eat it now. So that's why I don't have to pay you, because I said it was a treifa, and now it's not a treifa. So my whole din went away. Says the Gemara. Well, Rabbi Kiva is saying two things. Chada v'od kamar, right? He said one reason is that you don't have to pay because you're an expert. But furthermore, chada, you don't have to pay to to'eb b'dvar mishnata. You don't have to pay because you made a mistake in something that's explicit. Tudas Harofe said it's not something that you should have made a mistake in. And to'eb b'dvar mishnah choser. When you're to'eb b'dvar mishnah, the din is canceled. So your psak is thrown out. And furthermore, he owed, and says Rabbi Akiva, this is what we quote, Inami b'shikol hadata ita. If you even had made a mistake in something that was sort of an opinion, then it doesn't matter because mumche l'rabimata, you are an expert, and an expert doesn't just mean expert. It means that you are assigned by the public, which also gives you freedom from malpractice, basically. So that is how we explain it. Says Rav Nachman by Yitzchak the Rava, and I almost said this over before, but that's ridiculous. How could you say, right, that if Rabbi Tarfon made a mistake in something that is a Mishnah, which he did here, that the din is choser, and therefore he wouldn't have to pay, right? He wouldn't have to pay because the guy could say to him, the guy says, you made me have a treifa of my animal, and he says, well, I made a mistake, and your animal's not a treifa anymore. But the animal was already fed to the dogs, right? Says the Gemara, how could Rav Hamnuna ask a question of Rav Shesha from the para and say, oh, in the para, why would Rabbi Tarfon worry about paying? Our Mishnah says that the din is canceled. There, para klavim, veleta de tehader, right? He fed it to the dogs. So since he fed it to the dogs, even if you say the halacha is canceled, if the halacha is canceled, then you say the din is it's not a treifa, but you can't get your animal back. You can't sell it for steaks anymore. You already fed it to the dog. It says where it doesn't matter. This is what he was saying to him. If you are of the opinion that atah b'dvar mishnah is eno choser, which is not what we hold, right? So remember, our opinion is that if you make a mistake in a mishnah, the din is canceled. But what we're saying is, If you had thought that that is not canceled, that means alma kam dina. It means that the psak stands, and we just said you made a mistake. So now I understand. Rabbi Tarfon. That's why Rabbi Tarfon was worried that he was going to have to pay because he did the wrong thing. V'ka'amar le'iyu, and Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Tarfon, "Don't worry about it. You're an expert, and therefore you don't have to pay." Elai Amrit. But if you say, like Rav Sheshet says, that Ta'ab B'dvar Mishnah Choser, that in fact, this, because he made a mistake in a fundamental rule, it should be undone. We should appeal the case and say it's not a treifa. Lei, why can't Rabbi Tarfon say, I shouldn't have to pay you? Because Kivan Di'ilo Havai Para. If your cow was still here today, we would say, Dinach Lav Dina. We would say, I called it a treifa. I made a mistake. It's not a treifa. Go sell it for shawarma, right? V'lo klum avarita. I didn't do anything. Hashtanami lo klum avarita. Here too, you can't hold me responsible. Rashi sort of explains, because I am not the one who fed it to the dogs, right? I sent the psak to you. You went ahead and acted on my psak. It's not my responsibility, so maybe, says Rabbi Tarfon, that you acted rashly. Maybe you should have given a little bit of time and waited and seen. I didn't tell you go feed it to the dogs. I basically said it's a treifa. So you ran right away and you sold it for scrap metal, for dog food. But you should have given some time. If Chisda says, well, no, there's a big difference between the contradiction. So we're going, Chisda is going all the way back on explaining the difference between our Mishnah, which says that if you make a mistake, not a mistake, our Mishnah says that by dinei mamanut you can be chozrin, you can undo the din, whether it's chova or zakai, either way. And the Mishnah Bechorot says if you're done a din, the din stands, you just have to pay. Why is our Mishnah you undo the din, and the Mishnah Bechorot we say the din stands? If Chisda says the reason is because one Mishnah, our Mishnah, this is actually the Mishnah in Bechorot, is talking about a case where you are natal v'natan biyad, where the judge himself takes the object and takes the thing and gives it over and executes the judgment. If the judge executes the judgment, then the judgment stands. And if he's not an expert, he's got to pay. If he made a mistake, he's an expert, he doesn't have to pay. But our Mishnah in Sanhedrin is shalom natal v'natan biyad, where the judge didn't take it from the hand and give it to the other person. And so basically just gave a ruling. He said, you owe $100. He didn't activate it. And therefore, if the person has not done anything about it yet, we can retry the case and we could change the halacha. Says the Gemara, one second. I don't understand how that even works. Bishlama, I understand. Find the place, sorry. Bishlama, I understand. Sorry, I'm looking for where we are. Bishlama is 7 lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Bishlama says the Gemara, I understand that remember the case in Bechor had 4 clauses. Chiyevet Zakai, we'll read them all in a second, right? So I understand Chiyevet Zakai. How, right? A person's innocent, but the judge says to him, you have to pay $1,000. Kigon Shanatam Natam Biyad. I understand. You could say to him, pay me $1,000. I'm going to hand it over to Ruvain. So that means you executed the judgment. But how are you zikat chayav, right? Reuven came and sued Shimon for $1,000, and the judge came and said, Shimon, you don't have to pay, right? How do you find that case? The judge came to Shimon and said, you don't have to pay for that case, right? You got into a car accident, it's patur. You didn't give anything to him. You didn't give anything, but kivan da'amar paturata. But since you said halacha that you're patur, kigon shnatam natam biyadam. It says if you activated it because you don't need to do anything further. Right? Meaning there's not another step that's coming now. You basically wrote a thing and said Shimon is patur. So since you did that, you finalized the din. Once you finalize the din, we can't reevaluate it. It's only if you didn't finalize it by just saying halacha, we haven't activated it yet. That's where you can reevaluate it. Says the Gemara, so elamat nitin. So now explain our Mishnah to me, right? Our Mishnah says the katani dinei mamanut. Our Mishnah in Sanhedrin says monetary things machzirin bein the zchut bein the chova, that you can undo it whether it's the zchut or whether it's chova, meaning whether you initially said he's guilty and you change and say now he's innocent, or whether you originally said he's innocent and now you say he's guilty, or you originally said he doesn't have to pay and now you say he does have to pay. So remember, we explained our Mishnah has to be where you didn't execute the din. You just said the halacha. We haven't activated it yet, and therefore you can revisit it. But I don't understand. Says Bishmal the schut. I get that you can change it from schut, from guilt to innocence. Because originally the judge said to Ruvain, Chayavata, you go pay $1,000 to Shimon. but you didn't pay yet. But you didn't actually pay, or you didn't actually take it by hand. And so we have new facts and we want to revisit the case. How do you have the opposite, where initially he said you're innocent, and now he changes his mind and say you're guilty? Damar, because he initially said paturata. He said you don't have to pay. Now, oh, there's new facts. Now maybe you have to pay. But you just said that once you say paturata, that's the end of the din. Amr, you just quoted as saying, Kivan Damarle paturata, since the judge says to Shimon, you don't have to pay. It's as if he took it from Reuven's hand and said to Shimon, this is your money. Says the Gemara, you're right. There is no way to undo a halacha of innocence to make him guilty. Because once you say to him, you're innocent, you don't have to pay, that's the end of the din. And as we said earlier, at the end of the din, you don't revisit it. But our Mishnah was not saying two things. Chada Katani, our Mishnah was in fact saying one halacha, which is dinei mamanut, that when you have monetary things, you can change machzirin l'zchut, you can change it to say he's innocent, shehi chova, right? Which turns out to be a chova of the other person, right? Meaning, you're saying, you said to Ruvain, Shimon has to pay you $1,000. You then can change, as long as he didn't pay you yet, so the judgment was not executed, you could change your mind and say, oh, you know what? Shimon does not owe Ruvain $1,000, which of course means Ruvain is out $1,000. Says where, okay, so what's the equivalent by Dinei Nefashot? The Kavate Gabe Nefashot, the equivalent case by Dinei Nefashot, when we said you can be machzirin the zchut, right? Which means the ein machzir in the chova. So how do you explain those two cases, right? Turn the page, Taflam Gimel Amud Bet, that you can be chozer for zchut, but you can't to say that a murderer or previously defined murderer is innocent, but you can't be machzir in the chova. So I understand machzir in the zchut. I understand means zchut greda. It means that you can be machzirin for zchut. You should say to the guy you previously said he's guilty, but you can change your mind and say he's innocent, right? But when you say you can't be machzir the chova, what does chova mean in that case? You can't be machzir someone to say he's guilty when you originally said he's innocent, right? But that means l'schut shehi chova. We're explaining our Mishnah that the word chova does not literally mean chova. It means a schut that is a chova. How do you have a schut of a murderer, right? You go to a person who was accused of murder. Sorry, he's not a murderer. He was accused and found guilty of murder. It says the Mishnah, you can't undo it in a way that's a schut for him, that's a chova for somebody else. What does it mean a chova of somebody else? Chovatei deman. Who is the chova of somebody else? This is where what do you mean halokasha? There is a chova of somebody else because we say to him you're innocent, but when we say to him now you're innocent, chovatei de goel adam. Now the goel adam can't kill him, right? Because remember, when a person is chayiv mita, the goel hadam, which means the redeemer of blood of the relative of the person who he murdered, is allowed to go and kill him until he gets to galut. Let's say he did it b'shogeg, right? So originally they said in court you were guilty of murder by mistake, which means that someone can kill you until you run away to galut. Now we say to him, oh no, you're innocent. But by saying he's innocent, we're taking away the ability of the other guy to kill him. That doesn't make any sense. I understand. Because the Goel Adam is going to lose out on killing him, we then say we can't change the rule, we got to kill you. It makes no sense. Oh, and furthermore, my bane, right? You're saying the Mishnah is one case, but the Mishnah says whether it's this or whether it's that, which really implies that it's two cases. Kasha, we actually don't really resolve these questions. It's a little bit of a weaker explanation. Says the Gemara, well, I've got another answer, and that's Ravina's answer. So it says Ravina on the dot. We are now on Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. How many lines down? We are 6 lines. The first word on the line says, because remember, the problem we've had is that we really wanted to have a distinction between the Mishnah, which says if you do a judgment and make a mistake, the judgment stands and you got to pay, or our Mishnah, which says if you do a judgment and make a mistake, you can undo the judgment, right? So we said one explanation was it depends on whether you actually gave the thing over, in which case you effectuated the judgment, it stands, you can't change it, or our Mishnah where you didn't give the thing over. But our problem was that we said, well, we understand how you could say someone who was guilty give the thing over, because we said to Shimon, you owe $1,000, give me $1,000 to give over. But if I say to Shimon, you're innocent, you don't have to pay, how can I have taken something from him? Says Ravina, I have a very simple explanation. Right? Let's say Reuven claims Shimon owes him $1,000, and Reuven is holding on to a phone that belongs to Shimon. Shimon claims, I don't owe him the money. The judgment comes out and says Shimon doesn't owe the money, and they take the mashkon from Reuven and give it back to Shimon. because it's his mashkon. So then it turns out they made a mistake, but they did something in effect to prove that he's innocent. In the case of Timeat Tahar, where the judge said that the thing, remember this is the Mishnah Bechorot, the thing is Tameh, the Agabe Sheretz. It's where the judge said, look, all of this food is Tameh. I don't really think you're going to listen to my psak, so I'm going to take out my Sheretz, got a dead bug in his pocket, and touch your food with it so that you make it Tameh, right? Turns out, of course, that he was wrong. So that is example where the judgment was actualized because he made it Tameh. How are you Tiheret Tameh? How do you make something Tahar that's truly Tameh? That's where you take the peyrot, they're really tameh. The judge says, I analyzed this, I think they're tahar. And just so you're confident of that, you mix it. You mix it with all the other peyrot. So now it turns out that basically you no longer know where it is, and you caused everything to become tameh, right? Because a tameh thing that touches another tameh thing will be tameh. And so therefore you made basically the tuma into you made the thing into tuma when you took something which was really tameh and you made it tahar by mixing it with other things. So that is where you have an example where a judge can actually make the thing happen, and that's where the Mishnah Bechorot says that if a judge actually does it, notel v'notem biyad, then you don't undo the din. You fulfill the din. If he's not a mumcha, he has to pay. If he is a mumcha, he doesn't have to pay. So that is the explanation for our Mishnah, which says you are choser, and our Mishnah, which says it's choser, is either referring to where you didn't actually effectuate the din, or like we saw earlier, has to do with other details about what you made a mistake in. Was it a principal mistake? Was it a logical mistake? So those are the two answers we have. Continued our Mishnah now, the first two dots on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, around 10 lines from the top. We said Dinei Nefashot. Anyone can, Dinei Mamanut, anyone can speak up. Dinei Nefashot, you can only speak up for Zchut if you're a student, not for Chova. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita. Minayin liyotzei, this whole concept of who can speak up. Says the Braita, Minayin liyotzei l'meitin chayav. Let's say a person leaves court, they make a judgment, a verdict, he's guilty. And after you leave court, Amar Echad, one of the students says, Yeshli l'model Zchut. I just thought of something that would help him out. How do you know that even though you already concluded the din, you come back and you evaluate it? It's based on the pasuk which says, it doesn't just say that, but it says a naki, an innocent person, don't kill. This guy's innocent. You have to do everything you can not to kill him. How do you know the opposite? If you leave court being said you're zakah, you're schut, you're innocent. They evaluated you, they judge you, you didn't kill the person. And one person says, I just realized the detail that nobody paid attention to. Maybe he is guilty. How do we know that you don't go back and revisit that case? It's because the pasuk also says, Tzaddik al tarog. A person who's righteous, meaning the court found him righteous, don't kill him. So even though he's not really naki, he's not innocent, but he's righteous because court found him to be a tzaddik. Amar Rav Simi Barashi said, Rav Simi Barashi, that's very true for everyone except for a person who is a mesit. Chilufa lemesit. The opposite is true about a mesit. The mesit is someone who tries to convince other people to worship avodah zarah. Because there it says lo tachmo v'lo chasa alav. Don't have any compassion. Don't cover up. Don't do anything to help that person. Rav Kahana matni mi chi harog taragenu. Rav Kahana says the same thing, but it's from the pasuk which says, the next pasuk actually says, when you go to kill him, but it says the word harog taragenu twice. How do you kill someone twice? Meaning you make an effort to find the mesit guilty. Obviously he has to really be guilty, but you make an effort to do this. Now, as Rav Zera from Sheshet, what about chayvei goliot b'nayin? Right, what I just told you might only be true about someone who's being killed, a capital case. But what if a person killed someone b'shogeg, and so the court assesses it and says you really killed them b'shogeg, you got to go to galut, and if you don't, someone will kill you. But do you change the halacha there? It says, well, yeah, at rotzech rotzech, we do. We learn out the word rotzech by galut from rotzech by murder, and therefore it's the same halacha. He said to him, what about chayvei malkiot minayin? How about someone who's chayv makot, so he's not chayv to be killed, but he's chayv to get lashes? He says, that's true. Atya Rasha. It says the word ben hakot rasha by makot. It says the word rasha by those who are being killed. And therefore it's the same halacha. In fact, the Braita says this explicitly. Chayvei goliot minayin. How do we know that chayvei goliot also have the judgment, the rules of a capital case, and that you can only change for zchut, you can't change for chovah? How do we know that? Atya rotzeach from the word rotzeach, and chayvei malkiot minayin atya rasha. So Rav Kahana, Rav Sheshet knew the Braita. Says the Gemara now at the next two dots, we are 15 lines from the bottom. Ein machzirin chova. You can't undo a din for chova, we said, by capital cases. Says Rabbi Chia bar Abba, that just so you know, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, that's only if you're ta'a b'davar she'inat stukim modimba. That's if you make a mistake in something that is not, it's a dvar mishnah, it's something obvious, but the tzedukim don't admit to it. Meaning the Stukim who are not Jews, right? They follow only, well, they are Jews, sorry. Stukim who are not rabbinic Jews, they follow sort of the Torah Shebichtav, they don't follow all the halachot of the Mishnah. So writing in a Mishnah, the Stukim don't care about your Mishnayot, right? So they are not going to agree with that halacha. But if you made a mistake in something that even the Stukim would admit, meaning it's a pasuk basically, right? Because they are very literal. They take the Torah shebichtav. Then you can't say that that's a judgment. If somehow the court made a mistake and they missed an explicit pasuk, right? Then zil kari rafu. You go, everyone go and read the pasuk. Meaning it's a mockery of the court to say that if they make that kind of mistake, that you're going to say it doesn't matter. The court made the mistake. Once we found them innocent, we can't find them guilty. If it truly was a very fundamental mistake that even the Stukim would admit because it's a beferish pasuk, then you can undo the judgment, even for guilt. Ask Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, the same people speaking. What if you make a mistake in someone who's no efen no efen, which are sexual things, right? So they slept with each other. You made a mistake. I don't know. You might have forgotten that. Sorry, so some say it means the following. Actually, there's a lot of different interpretations here. Some say it means that they found that the guy was guilty, but not the woman. So the no'ef was guilty, but not the no'efet. So Amalei, so according to that explanation, he said to him, look, admuktach yakid, while which means as your fire is burning, mokad is a fire, zil kutz karach v'tzli, go and cut open your kara, your pumpkin, and roast it, right? Meaning, when the fire's hot, take advantage. And basically, it's exactly what I just told you, right? I just told you that if you make a fundamental mistake where something is so clear, right? The Torah says that if a person sleeps with a person who's inappropriate, an Ishitish, let's say, they both get killed. And the court said only the man is guilty or only the woman's guilty and not the other one. That's a huge mistake, and din is choser. Itmar nami, in fact, the statement of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yochanan, ta'ab ben oef choser. If you make a mistake in this case, again, this is the very simplest explanation, then if you make a mistake and say the man is guilty, but the woman is not, you can change that halacha because that is obviously wrong. So what's an example of a case by sexual things where you are not machzir? Let's say you made a mistake in sleeping. They had relations shalokadarka, meaning not vaginal intercourse but anal intercourse. So there, they are chayav, but you can talk about it. And actually, we're going to talk about it later when we talk about the chiyuv mita. But you can see that there's some debate. Is that natural? It's not. What the pasuk's referring to? Is that not what the pasuk's referring to? You can see why there's some discussion. Now, it's really, we know the halacha, so you're chayav, and they made a mistake. But there, if they made a mistake and said you're innocent because it was biyah shelo kedarka, we wouldn't undo it and say you're guilty. But if you made a mistake and said, oh, the man's chayav and the woman's not, that's such a pasuk mistake that we would undo that. I think, should I stop here? No, let me do a few more lines because we are at the two dots near the bottom of daf Lamed Gimel, sorry, Amud Bet. The truth is it keeps going. I'm going to actually stop here. So we are going to stop at the last two dots on Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. Apologize for not doing this on live time, but hope everyone gets to hear it on the Zoom and have a wonderful week. Shavua Tov again, everyone.